On Friday, the fourth forum on the development of Tibet, China opened in Lhasa, capital of the Tibet Autonomous Region in southwest China. Participants from almost 40 countries and regions have gathered to brainstorm ideas to raise Tibet's development to the next level. What ideas have been proposed so far? In what ways has the Belt and Road Initiative been shaping things, and how to preserve Tibet's pristine environment while boosting development? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Here in the studio, I'm pleased to be joined by Assistant Research Fellow at the China Tibetology Research Center, Dr. Lajia Dangzhou, who is ethnic Tibetan, and by Han Hua, Fellow with the Chongyang Financial Research Institute at Renmin University here in Beijing. From Tibet, I'm joined by Liz Mcleod, Creative Director of Meridian Line Films UK, which has made a 5-part series about life in Tibet. And later I'll be joined by Xiao, Assistant Fellow at the China Tibetology Research Center, also from Lhasa. So the warmest welcome to all of you to come on The Point. Now, on Friday, Chinese President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory letter to the forum in which he encouraged participants to come up with ways to help develop Tibet in all aspects. But first, let's put things into the context. Compared with the past, Tibet has come a long way. I understand some statistics we can show that in the past 6 decades, the GDP growth in Tibet, for instance, rose by about 190 times to $22 billion US. That is, I think, an unprecedented growth rate, which is not seen in many parts of the world. By the way, just earlier this year, Tibet celebrated 60 years of so-called democratic reform in the process, where the region abolished its serfdom and slavery system, and the people in Tibet regained control of their lives. So that was a very significant turning point. And also another very significant indicator about the situation was the average life expectancy, which has changed, which has doubled from about 35.5 years 60 years ago to 70 years, so nearly doubled in 6 decades. Again, something I guess unprecedented. Dr. Lajia Dangzhou, which moment in history are we seeing Tibet now?
Well, this year is a very important year because it is the 60th year of Tibet democratic reform. And everywhere in the Tibet Autonomous Region, the people celebrated this moment. I think it is very worth to celebrate. Before 60 years, that democratic reforms took place at Tibet Autonomous Region. Before this reform, you know, Tibetan society is located at a very low productivity, and the social progress level is very, very poor, and its society system is a feudal serfdom. We call it a feudal serfdom. However, through the democratic reform, the people have got the rebirth, and the social have took place a very, very big, great change. Now, you know, theoretically we say that the purpose of the reform is to liberate and to develop the social productivity. So the democratic reform, it liberates and developed the Tibet Autonomous Region's social productivity, and it brought a great change to the comprehensively to all the kinds of all the fields of society, including politics and economic, as well as culture, environment.
Is your view shared by the great majority of Tibetan people? Is your view shared by the great majority of Tibetan people?
Yes, of course. We shared. Also, we participated the majority progress.
Hanghua, at this moment, we are looking further, we're looking ahead, right? And according to a white paper released by the State Council marking the 60 years of democratic reform, the Tibetan government is working hard to handle a series of relationships. For instance, the relationship between state investment and social investment, the relationship between major projects, I guess big projects, infrastructure projects, and projects to improve people's well-being, or the relationship between protecting ecology and benefiting people, and also the relationship between increasing the output and efficiency of enterprises, but vis-a-vis improving the welfare of employees. So to your understanding, are these relationships unique to the situation of Tibet, or are they some kind of shared challenges for different regions around China, but with a Tibetan touch here?
I think both, because this relationship put forward is definitely categorized by the Tibetan uniqueness to identify. Dangzhou just mentioned a key word, the rebirth. After the 6 years of this serfdom, a system was released and the people were liberated. And from the Chinese ancient culture, that the 60 years always marks a milestone of the development, not only for people, for a region, for the state as well.
End of a cycle, so beginning of a new cycle.
Exactly. So I think most of the relationships are targeting the Tibetan people and the Tibetan society, which we call it, specified to its geographic situation as well as the societal development at this moment. But down the road, Tibet is not alone in terms of further development, in terms of further reform, in terms of merging into the Belt and Road Initiative. So some of the relationships definitely are shared, not only by Tibetan people, but also by Chinese people who can work together to enjoy not only the opportunities, but also face the challenges down the road.
Well, we have our guest, Liz Mcleod, who has been participating in this year's Development Forum, and let's go to her right now. Liz, thank you very much for standing by and joining us. So we were discussing the challenges, the kind of challenges that Tibet is faced with at this moment, and participants from home and abroad are basically encouraged to come up with suggestions to address these challenges. So from your observation, what was the hottest topic, the focus of discussion during the day, and what are some of the feedback, some of the opinions voiced today?
Well, as you probably know, there were, the morning was lectures, and then in the afternoon we divided into 4 groups, and in each group there were about 30 people. So, as you can imagine, there were a lot of different points made and a lot of different comments, a lot of different suggestions. I think one of the points that was made that struck me so forcibly amongst the foreign delegates was how surprised most of them were to discover how developed Tibet is. They expected to come to a part of China that was much poorer and much more backward than in fact it is. So that was the starting point of a lot of the foreign delegates. A second point I think that people made was that this misconception that many people around the world have of what life is like in Tibet is perhaps perpetuated by the fact that not many foreign tourists get the chance to come to Tibet, not many foreign journalists get the chance. So one of the points that the foreign delegates were making was, as part of the opening up of Tibet, that should be an opening up to foreign visitors, and that would pay dividends in terms of people actually being able to look around, and the phrase that was used a lot was seeing is believing. So people could see with their own eyes and talk to people and come to their own conclusions, and I think that would go a long way to helping people come up with perhaps a more balanced understanding of what life in Tibet is actually like today.
I think your view is
so that was one of the points, was making tourism
Yeah, I think what you just said is also shared by some other.
Sorry, say again.
What you just said is also the shared opinion of some other foreign delegates or foreign diplomats who have visited that region, and I think the Chinese government will consider these suggestions and make decisions based on its own judgment of the situation, when and how to slowly move towards that direction. I understand that your team made a 5-part series about life in Tibet, so I want to hear a little bit more about that. Was that the only time that you visited Tibet?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, was that the only time that you visited Tibet? What was the most impressive discovery you had during that trip?
I think what we wanted to do was show today's Tibet, and we wanted to show people and people's stories. And so we travelled all over Tibet, really, from Ningxi up to Nagchu and Amdo, and we spent a lot of time in Lhasa as well. And what we found, and this sometimes, when people travel to other parts of the world, they often say, oh, the people were so warm and welcoming and lovely. But it's really very special how the Tibetan people are. There's an elegance, there's a joie de vivre, there's a sense of humour, there's a real welcoming willingness to let you come into their lives, visit, party with them, see their work, find out about what they believe in, what their hopes for the future are. So it was a wonderful experience from that point of view. And we also looked at some really interesting science as well. We went to the cosmic array that's north of Lhasa. We went to one of the research laboratories where they're looking at how to design barley that can deal with the changing climate, which is obviously a serious concern, which indeed people were talking about a lot at the forum today. So much to see in Tibet, so much to talk about. Something else I wanted to say about the forum, one of the other points that people were making was that people-to-people contacts are very important, and that there's government-led people-to-people contacts, but there should also be grassroots people-to-people contacts. This was being made especially by delegates from Nepal, India and Pakistan, who really, really treasure, I think, the ancient relationships that there was between Tibet, mainland China, Mongolia and South Asia. And indeed people were saying that that's perhaps something we can look back to, that the relationships, the interconnection, the learning from each other. One of the delegates said that the Silk Road was a knowledge road. I thought that was really, really interesting. And people were saying this could be an inspiration for the future of the Belt and Road Initiative, that it's a knowledge exchange as well as an economic initiative.
Great points you're making, and you touched upon a lot of things. I wanted to come back to our guests here in the studio and elaborate a little bit. For instance, this traditional Tibetan culture of hospitality, of warmth. Dr. Dangzhou, you are an ethnic Tibetan, and Tibetan culture has always been very special, and I think it's a very essential part of the charm of that place, that it's attracting so many tourists, right, both from home and abroad. I understand the number is something like 34 million over the past year. So what is being done at this moment to preserve that very innocent, very special part of the Tibetan culture?
Oh, well. Tibetan traditional culture is unfamiliar with many people, and also Tibet Autonomous Region is a main target for tourists. So there's a lot of tourists every year. And also Tibetan songs, Tibetan dance, there's a very familiar and there's very popular. So during 60 years, Tibetan traditional culture have achieved a great progress, and it was preserved and developed. I always think about why it have got such great progress. I think some factors are very important. for example, education. During the 60 years, we already established a modern education system at TAR, and the people, the more and more children can accept education freely from primary.
For 15 years, I understand.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 15
even
years.
Longer,
Yeah.
Even longer than the rest part of the country. You talk about education. I think it's a very important factor.
Yeah.
But we are going to take a very short break. We'll come back to that point. And before that, I'm going to thank Liz Mcleod for having joined us from Lhasa. And you have been watching The Point. We'll come back and continue to talk about Tibet. Stay with us. Welcome back. My guests in the studio are Dr. Lajia Dangzhou from the China Tibetology Research Center and Han Hua from the Chongyang Financial Institute Research Center at the Renmin University. I'm also joined by Xiao, who is Assistant Fellow at the China Tibetology Research Center from Lhasa, Tibet. So we'll cross over to Xiao in just a moment. But just to finish off that topic about education, this is probably, it doesn't sound so remarkable, but actually if you look at the starting point, 60 years ago, the great majority of Tibetans were illiterate because they were the great majority were slaves, so they never got the chance to. But looking ahead, what has to be done better in order to preserve the cultural tradition, the language, the religious belief that people have been holding for so long?
The most important is to spend it on education. It is
still.
Yeah, it is will benefit for a long time. It is basically. So I think this is very important. And another one is to preserve and to develop the rural areas traditional culture, to abandon their cultural life, the people's cultural life in the rural areas. That is very important.
You mean abandon or to
abandon? To enrich.
Enrich.
Yeah, enrich.
Okay, that's the opposite.
Yeah.
That will be the opposite.
Yeah.
All right. So let me cross over to our guest, Xiao, who is standing by in Lhasa. And I want to talk about the situation we are going to witness in the years ahead. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, there has been a 190-fold increase in Tibet's GDP. And yet, if you look at the sheer volume, last year was 22 billion. That is compared to the #1 GDP volume among all of the 31 provinces and regions in China. The top is 60 times larger than the size of Tibet. So, Mr. Xiao, it seems that although Tibet's economy has been growing very fast, its volume is very small. In order to sustain its growth going forward, what kind of vitality has to be injected in the local economy, and from where can it come from?
Yes, as you have said, that during the past 16 years, Tibet has experienced tremendous progress in economic and social aspects. I think it's mostly due to the support from the central government, and also we call the counterpart support system. And also, to ensure that the further development of Tibet's economy, I think that the most fundamental measures that we should take is to keep a more proactive opening up policy. That means both make Tibet both open to the inland of China and also open to the rest of the world.
How much of attention was given to this topic during this forum that you were attending, and what kind of suggestions to really connect Tibet, both with the inland provinces and with countries directly neighboring Tibet?
Well, I think that in the morning, in the opening ceremony of this forum, President Xi Jinping has sent a congratulatory letter, and he himself has raised at least 4 points of recommendations, namely to build a beautiful and happy Tibet, to inherit the traditional culture, to protect the ecological environment and also to enhance the opening up. So I think that my suggestion in this forum with regarding to the openness is that we should firstly enhance the level of people-to-people communication and also to enlarge the scope of communication, which means we should include more people of different classes, different backgrounds, different countries, different disciplines to talk about the development issues of Tibet.
Yeah. How important is the Belt and Road Initiative in promoting the kind of people-to-people exchanges? Because the guests that were on the show previously, Ms. Mcleod from the UK, she also mentioned the importance of people-to-people exchanges. So why is it so important, and what can the Belt and Road Initiative do to further that goal here?
The Belt and Road Initiative is a very important grand strategy for contemporary China. As for Tibet, I think the BRI is even more important because the Tibet is facing a very sophisticated challenges in promoting BRI construction, namely the construction of the gateway to South Asia. Because of the sophisticated natural environment in Tibetan Plateau and also the sophisticated political situation that we met in dealing with the opening up of Tibet. So that means that we should not just counter on the economic calculation, but rely more on the people-to-people communication. We should depend more on the role of the traditional culture of Tibet, especially Tibetan Buddhism, to link Tibet with the rest of part of South Asian countries.
Okay. My final question, and please be brief if you can. How much is that opinion shared among the participants of this forum, and what is the feedback from the organizer of the forum upon hearing such suggestions?
I think this forum is a very, very high level forum. During my discussion with the participants of the forum and also the discussion with the international friends during our previous trip to Ningxi and also Lhasa. And the information I gathered about this forum is that most of the foreign guests think that this is a very good style of communication and discussion. It's can I say clash of minds, because so many people with so many different disciplines, so many different experiences, backgrounds, can share their knowledge, their experience, their wisdom together, and just for one subject, the development of Tibet. That's a very good topic. Okay,
thank you very much, Xiao for joining us from Lhasa on site of this very important forum. So let's come back here. Hanhua, we were talking about the importance of the BRI, and it's very interesting. Both guests mentioned the importance of people-to-people exchanges and how the BRI can push forward that. Is that the kind of strategic role that Tibet is foreseen to have under this Belt and Road Initiative?
Yes, definitely, because Tibet was an integral part of the Asian to South Silk Road in the history, and it is also the bridge between Chang'an, the Tang Dynasty capital, and the Asian Tibetan region, and also the gateway to the South Asian countries, not only in the past times, but also in the current days. So I think, but given I have a little bit slightly different opinion towards people-to-people exchange, given that Tibetan only has about, say, 3 million people in the total population. So I would prefer, if I can make some suggestions to this development for down the road and the opportunities and challenges, I think maybe a virtual Silk Road or a digital Silk Road to be initiated and incubated in Tibet might be more feasible in this regard. So people, especially the educated people, can be utilized, not only the people's resources, but also maybe the clean, energy resources as well as other resources.
I think that's a very interesting idea. However, there is a difference between communication online, even a video chat, then meeting people face to face, seeing people eye to eye and touching, shaking hands and so on and so forth. So what are being done then, or what can be done, Dr. Dangzhou, for Tibetan people to have more communication, face-to-face communication with people around that region? Because without infrastructure, without, let's say, flight connections, you simply cannot do that. So a certain amount of groundwork has to be done.
Okay. More developed, more challenges is following. We know that. So I think. Briefly say how to coordinate the environmental protection and the economic development. This is very important, and maybe it will be challenge that Tibet is further progress. Okay. And then another one is, as we all know, tourism, traveling is the pillar industry of Tibet. So future, so how to enhance the tourism infrastructure and how to enhance to cultivation of professional talents. That is very important, and also it will be following all the time.
What proposal would you make if you have the opportunity to participate in such a forum? What would you say?
Last year I worked at Tibet in a small county. So first of all, I told before that I have to enhance the education and then to cultivate more professional talents. That is very important.
Okay. I hope there are people who are talking about it at this moment. We'll see. Well, many thanks to my two guests, Dr. Lajia Dangzhou from the China Tibetology Research Center and Han Hua from Renmin University. And with that, we are coming to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point, and have a good weekend.